we have a regulatory agency appointed by the governor that theoretically can exercise near unlimited power over electricity transmission. That is run by a private utility, National Grid. The regulatory agency doesn't use the power that it theoretically has. So basically, should that change, and would it present a viable alternative to renationalizing the system?
Yeah, so in the deregulated systems, you could have a deregulated system where you had publicly owned enterprises and public entities at different scales. So you could keep a deregulated system and then have a public distributor, a public supplier, and then a public grid manager. You could have them all working together. That could solve some of the problems without making sure that you allow communities and individuals to feed in renewables and so on and so forth. So I'm not saying that deregulation is not impossible to have a publicly owned system. You could have a publicly owned system and a deregulated system. So that's one way to do it. You could also have a completely publicly owned system and not a deregulated system. You could have monopolies. I'm not a climate justice expert, so I'm not going to come down one way or the other here, but I think it's something that everyone is starting to think about as well. In terms of all the powers that people have, the thing about public ownership that I like to tell everyone at the conclusion of my talks is, what draws me to public ownership is that it's a flexible ownership form. Unlike private ownership, which is beholden to profit interests, quarterly returns, it's very narrow, it's very rigid. Public ownership really is, it's very flexible and it's open, and the choices that you make for public ownership are open, they're open to what the community wants to do. So if as a community you want to go to 100% renewables like Burlington, Vermont, or something else, and you have a publicly owned utility, you can do that. You can put pressure on that and they have to respond. Just recently in Nebraska, as I said, Nebraska has an entirely publicly owned system. Traditionally been very, very top down. It's just, had a lot of coal, has been very interesting, from an economic or ecological perspective. However, there's an activist campaign that's mobilizing around democratizing utilities in Nebraska, and just recently, I just found out the other day that I think 3 climate activists were elected to the board of the Omaha Power District, Public Power District. So essentially, that's going to overnight change the orientation of a giant publicly owned enterprise in the state of Nebraska, and hopefully bring in more renewables and more wind and so on and so forth.